Millionaire reunites with his first love while serving coffee and panics instantly. The New York City sky darkened suddenly on that May morning. Augustus Mendoza, owner of Mendoza Developments, one of the largest construction companies in the country, looked up as he left his office on Fifth Avenue. He hadn't brought an umbrella. When the first heavy drops began to fall, he quickened his pace, clutching the Italian leather briefcase that held the documents for his meeting with foreign investors. "Damn this rain," he muttered, ducking into the first doorway he encountered. It was Ipanema Cafe, a simple yet cozy establishment that contrasted sharply with the surrounding upscale restaurants. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled his nostrils as he entered, evoking an odd sense of familiarity. Augustus adjusted his immaculate navy blue suit and walked to the counter. The cafe was nearly empty at that hour, except for a few executives chatting at a distant table. The barista was busy arranging coffee packets on the shelf, her back turned. "A double espresso, please," he ordered, while glancing at his wristwatch. He still had time before the meeting. When the woman turned around, time seemed to freeze. Augustus's face paled as if he had seen a ghost. It was her. After 20 years, he was standing before Janine Silva. The briefcase slipped from his hands, scattering documents all over the floor. Augustus's heart raced like it hadn't in years, the days when they ran together along the beach on Paradise Isle, back when they were teenagers spending their vacations at their uncle's summer house. Janine recognized him immediately as, well, the teapot she held trembled, spilling coffee onto the tray. Her warm brown eyes, which Augustus remembered as always joyful, now revealed shock and something else, perhaps hurt. "Augustus," she murmured, as if in disbelief. "Jan, I never imagined," he stammered, bending down to collect the papers. His hands shook as much as hers. A younger employee rushed over to help him, but Augustus barely noticed her presence. His eyes remained fixed on Janine, taking in the changes time had etched on her face. The freckles he had always adored, still, dusted her nose, and her naturally curly hair, now cut shorter, framed the face that haunted his most secret dreams. "Have you been working here for a long time?" he finally managed once he'd composed himself. 3 years, she replied curtly, serving the coffee as if he were just another customer. "That'll be $14. Augustus paid, leaving a generous tip that she ignored. He sat by the window, watching the rain come down hard, turning the avenue into a stream. From his seat, he could see Janine's profile as she attended to other customers. Time had been kind to her. At 38, she still possessed the natural beauty that had captivated him when they were only 17. As he sipped his coffee, memories flooded his mind. The summer on Paradise Isle, the secret kisses, the promises made under the moonlight. And then her abrupt departure when she chose New York City and an engineering college over the love she had vowed was eternal. She had chosen the dream of building an empire, leaving behind the girl who had believed in his every word. Augustus had been raised in Perry Gardens, a humble neighborhood in the northern part of the city. The son of a bricklayer and a seamstress, he grew up determined to overcome his family's financial limitations. When he met Janine during his vacations with his uncles, he already carried the dream of becoming someone important. And he had succeeded at the cost of sacrifices, including love. Now 47, he owned an expansive real estate empire with projects all over the country. He lived in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, drove imported cars, and traveled first class. He had achieved every material dream he once held, yet the emptiness inside him had never left. His marriage to Christina, daughter of an influential businessman in the sector, had lasted only 10 years and given him his only son, Henry Mendoza, now 24, and working as the financial director in his father's companies. The divorce had occurred 7 years ago when Christina left for Paris with a French artist, making it clear she could never tolerate her husband's obsessive perfectionism. Anything else? Janine's voice pulled him back to the present. She was standing by his table with an unreadable expression. "Are you okay, Janine?" he asked, ignoring the formality she tried to maintain. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied professionally. "Would you like another coffee?" Augustus shook his head. It's incredible running into you after all these years, he ventured. A brief flash of emotion crossed her eyes, quickly replaced by a distant look. Life has its twists, doesn't it? You went your way, and I went mine. Before he could reply, the cafe door opened, and a girl of about 16 entered. She wore the uniform of a traditional private school in Soho and carried a backpack adorned with band stickers. "Mom, I forgot the house key," the girl exclaimed as she approached the counter. She had the same curly hair as Janine, but her eyes were different, green and expressive. "Larissa, I've told you to keep the key in your backpack," Janine chided, taking a keychain from her pocket and handing it to her daughter. "Go straight home. I have a shift until 9. The girl agreed, kissed her mother and hurried out, barely noticing Augustus, who watched the scene with curiosity. "Your daughter is beautiful," he remarked as Janine passed by his table once more. "Thank you," she said, and for a moment, her face lit up with a genuine smile, the first since their reunion. The rain abated and Augustus realized he was late for his meeting. Reluctantly, he stood, leaving a card on the table. "I have to go, but I'd love to talk to you. My number's on there if you'd like to get in touch." Janine glanced at the card without touching it. "I'm not sure it's a good idea." "Augustus, so much time has passed." 20 years, he said firmly as he grasped his briefcase, "and it feels like it was only yesterday that I last saw you at the beach." She looked away, but eventually picked up the card and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. Augustus felt a spark of hope. "I'll be back tomorrow at another cafe," he promised as he walked toward the door. "The coffee will be here," she replied, her tone not revealing whether the promise was welcome or not. As Augustus stepped out into the now sunny avenue, he knew that something fundamental had changed in his life. The emptiness he'd carried for 2 decades finally had a name, Janine, and he would do anything to reclaim what he had lost. Over the following days, Augustus established a new routine. Every morning at precisely 8:30, he appeared at Ipanema Cafe. He always ordered the same thing, a double espresso, and sat at the same table by the window. From there he watched Janine work, gathering the courage to initiate a deeper conversation. She treated him with professional courtesy but kept her distance. In her measured gestures, Augustus saw the lingering hurt that time hadn't erased. Still he persisted, leaving generous tips and trying brief exchanges that rarely moved beyond the weather or the cafe's bustle. On the 3rd week, he arrived, earlier than usual, and found Janine alone, preparing to open the establishment. "Good morning," he said, standing at the door. "I know you haven't opened yet, but I thought maybe we could talk before the rush begins." Janine hesitated, then unlocked the door. 15 minutes, Augustus. I need to get everything organized before opening." He stepped inside, observing the space in a new light. Ipanema Cafe was simple yet welcoming, furnished with dark wood pieces and adorned with paintings of Brazilian landscapes. There was something in the place that reflected Janine's personality, authentic and unpretentious. "I didn't know you'd moved back to New York City," he began, sitting at the counter as she started up the machines. "I returned 5 years ago," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "After I got divorced." The mention of her ex-husband sparked a pang of jealousy in Augustus that he knew he shouldn't feel. "And your daughter? She seems like a wonderful kid." At last, Janine smiled. "Larissa is the best part of my life. She's got her father's strong will, but thankfully she inherited my common sense." An awkward silence settled between them. There were so many questions, so many explanations needed. "Janine, I know I have no right to just appear in your life like this, but since I saw you, I can't think about anything else," Augustus confessed, mustering his courage. "What happened between us? What happened between us is in the past," she interrupted, harsher than she had intended. She took a deep breath before continuing. "You went your way, Augustus. You became the great businessman you always wanted to be. I, too, followed my path. I never forgot you," he insisted, leaning over the counter. Janine stared at him, her brown eyes shining with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "It wasn't what it seemed when you left without looking back. Your last letter said New York City was your big chance and that you couldn't waste it, that we needed to take a break. The bitterness in her voice made Augustus shrink. "I was young and stupid, Janine. I had so many dreams. And I wasn't a part of them," she finished, turning to arrange cups while hiding her feisty look. "I hold no grudge, really, but I see no point in dredging up the past." Augustus wanted to say that she had always been part of his dreams, that during the most important moments of his career, at gala dinners and inaugurations, he'd imagined having her by his side, but the words caught in his throat. "I heard you're having issues with your house," he commented, changing the subject. Janine turned, startled. "How do you know about that?" Augustus hesitated. He didn't want to admit that he'd hired a private investigator to find out about her life. "New York is smaller than it seems. A friend of mine lives in the same neighborhood as you in Soho." She narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "And did that friend mention that my house has structural issues after the last storm? Or that my health insurance didn't fully cover the surgery I needed last year, and now I'm drowning in debt?" The acidity in her tone was palpable. Augustus felt ashamed for invading her privacy, yet he couldn't regret it. He needed to know. "Maybe I can help, Janine. It wouldn't be hard for me." "Don't!" Her reply came so fast and forcefully that he flinched. Janine took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need your charity, Augustus. I've managed far worse on my own." Her pride had always been one of her most admirable and frustrating qualities. "It's not charity. It's friendship," he insisted. "Friends?" She laughed humorlessly. "We're not friends, Augustus. We were lovers 20 years ago, and now we're practically strangers." Her words hurt him more than he expected. Before he could reply, the back door opened, and a woman of about 60 entered, carrying a box of sweets. "Good morning, Janine. I brought the brigadeiros and quindins you ordered." "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had a customer," the elderly lady said, glancing curiously at Augustus. "Mrs. Zelda, this is Augustus, a long-time acquaintance," Janine introduced. "Augustus, Mrs. Zelda makes the best sweets in New York City. If you want to try something, I recommend the quindin." The tension from the earlier moment dissipated, and Augustus silently thanked the interruption. He accepted a quindin offered by Mrs. Zelda and sincerely complimented the treat. "You should come to our neighborhood festival this weekend," Mrs. Zelda remarked excitedly. "Janine will be performing with the community choir." "Zelda," Janine admonished, embarrassed. "Do you still sing?" Augustus asked, surprised and enchanted. He remembered how her voice had once hypnotized him during beachside guitar nights. "Only in the shower and with the neighborhood choir," she replied modestly. "Nothing too special." "Nothing too special?" "Girl, you're the best voice in the choir," Mrs. Zelda protested, turning to Augustus. "The festival is this Saturday, starting at 4 in the afternoon at Sunset Square in Soho. Everyone from the neighborhood will be there." "I'd love to go," Augustus said, genuinely interested. "If you don't mind," he added, glancing at Janine. She shrugged, attempting to appear indifferent, but a faint blush colored her cheeks. "It's a public event." At that moment, the front door opened as the first customers of the day began to arrive. Janine quickly resumed her professional role, and Augustus understood that their conversation was over. He paid for the coffee. He hadn't even finished, and the treat. "I'll be at the festival," he promised before leaving. Once on the sidewalk, he breathed in the crisp New York morning air, feeling a mixture of frustration and hope. Janine was still hurt, yet she hadn't shut him out completely. It was a beginning. As he walked toward his car parked nearby, he didn't notice the young man watching him from across the street. Henry Mendoza, his son, squinted with suspicion, discreetly photographing the facade of Ipanema Cafe with his cell phone. For weeks he'd noticed changes in his father's behavior. Early morning outings, cancelled important meetings, a different gleam in his eyes. Now he was determined to find out what, or who, was behind those changes. Inside the cafe, Janine washed cups with more force than necessary. Augustus's presence had stirred feelings she thought were long buried. "He's handsome," Mrs. Zelda commented, while arranging sweets in the display. "And he seems to really like you." "He likes what he can't have," Janine replied, drying her hands on her apron. "It's always been that way." "People change, dear. Some don't, she shot back, recalling the heartache she had felt upon reading Augustus's last letter 20 years ago. That day, while serving customers with her practiced smile, Janine fought against memories flooding back like a torrent, dismantling the carefully built barriers of years. What Augustus didn't know, and what no one knew, was that she harbored far more than just the sorrows of that Paradise Isle summer. She kept a secret that could change everything. The Soho Spring Festival transformed Sunset Square into a mosaic of colors and sounds. Artisan stalls and traditional food vendors encircled a small makeshift stage where various groups would perform throughout the day. Augustus arrived punctually at 4 in the afternoon. He had traded his customary suit for a light blue shirt and jeans, a conscious attempt to shed the image of the imposing businessman. He felt out of place amid the community atmosphere, but the possibility of seeing Janine outside, the formal setting of the cafe, was worth the discomfort. He wandered among the stalls, admiring the local crafts. At one stand he encountered Mrs. Zelda selling her sweets. She smiled upon recognizing him. "Glad you came. Janine is helping organize the performances. She must be near the stage," she said, handing him a brigadeiro. On the house. Augustus thanked her and headed in the indicated direction. He found Janine talking with a group of women, all wearing white t-shirts emblazoned with Voices of Soho Choir. Her hair flowed loosely, catching the afternoon sun in golden highlights among her curls. For a moment, he stood silently, admiring her from afar, remembering how he used to call her "my mermaid" during those Paradise Isle days. When he finally approached, Janine spotted him. Her smile faltered for an instant before she quickly recovered. "You came," she said in a neutral tone. "I said I would," he replied, handing her a small bouquet of daisies he'd bought on the way. "For luck during your performance." She hesitated before accepting the flowers. "Thank you, we go on in half an hour." An awkward silence fell between them. Augustus longed to say so much more, yet he feared rejection. It was Janine who broke the silence. "Look, since you're here, why don't you get to know a bit about our neighborhood? We take great pride in our community." That small olive branch filled him with hope. "I'd love a guided tour from the most beautiful lady in Soho." Janine rolled her eyes, but a slight smile played on her lips. "Don't start with your pickup lines, Augustus Mendoza. I've been immune to them since 2004. They walked side by side around the square. Janine showed him the community library she had helped found, the cultural center where she taught music to underprivileged children in her spare time, and the small local art gallery where some of her works had been exhibited. "Do you paint?" Augustus asked, surprised and charmed by yet another facet he hadn't known about. "It's just a hobby," she minimized. "I started after the divorce as therapy. My therapist said I needed a channel to express my anger." "And did it work?" "In part," she admitted. "At least I saved the money I would have spent breaking dishes." They both laughed, and for a moment the tension between them eased. It was almost like the old days, when they could talk about anything. "Janine, why did you never try to find me?" Augustus asked abruptly, a question that had haunted him for weeks. She stopped walking, becoming serious. "At first, because I was too hurt. Then, well, your life moved on. I saw your photos in magazines, your marriage to that socialite, the birth of your son. You seemed happy in your concrete and glass world. What right would I have to appear and complicate everything?" Augustus swallowed hard. "I was never truly happy, Janine, not even with all the success." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Larissa, who came running over. The teenager paused upon seeing Augustus, studying him with curiosity. "Mom, the choir is about to start. Everyone's looking for you." "Oh my God, I lost track of time," Janine exclaimed, glancing at the clock. "Larissa, this is Augustus, a longtime friend." "Augustus, this is my daughter, Larissa." "Nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand to the girl. Larissa shook his hand firmly, her green eyes scrutinizing him intently. "You seem familiar. Have we met before?" "At the cafe a few weeks ago," Augustus replied, uncomfortable under the teenager's inquisitive gaze. Maybe," Larissa murmured, suspicious. "Mum, let's go. Mrs. Zelda is freaking out." Janine nodded and addressed Augustus. "I have to go. If you want to watch the performance—" "I wouldn't miss it for anything," he assured. As she left with her daughter, Augustus watched them, noticing how Larissa animatedly gestured as she leaned in to whisper something to her mother. Janine shook her head in response, appearing exasperated. The choir's performance was moving. Janine's sweet yet powerful voice stood out amid the popular Brazilian songs they performed. When she sang a solo of Gonzaguinha's "Oke Oke," she looked directly at Augustus in the audience. The song's message about the beauty and pain of living fully seemed addressed to him. After the performance, as the crowd erupted, in enthusiastic applause, Augustus felt someone beside him. He turned and found Henry, his son, watching him with a serious expression. "Dad, we need to talk," the young man said, in a tone that brooked no refusal. Surprised and annoyed, Augustus withdrew from the crowd with his son. "What are you doing here, Henry? How did you know where I was?" "I've been tracking your moves for the past few weeks," Henry admitted bluntly. "Cancelled important meetings, arriving late at the office, mysterious outings. I thought you might be having health issues, but it seems the diagnosis is something else." The sarcastic tone irritated Augustus. "You have no right to follow me, Henry. My personal life isn't any of your business or the company's." "That's what you say when you start acting irrationally," retorted his son. "I found out about your daily visits to the cafe. About this woman." He gestured toward the stage where Janine was receiving greetings from the audience. "Who is she? A scam artist you recently met?" Anger flared on Augustus's face. "Never speak of her that way again. Janine is important to me." Henry narrowed his eyes, calculating. "Important how?" "Dad, we've got a new project in Brasilia to finalize, investors waiting for answers. And you're here at a neighborhood festival, looking like a love-struck teenager." "I'm 47. I don't need your approval for my personal decisions," Augustus replied coolly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I intend to congratulate the choir on their excellent performance." He left his son behind, Henry furious yet knowing he wouldn't give up easily. The obsessive control of the family business was a trait Henry had inherited from his father, albeit without the work ethic and vision that had made Augustus one of the most respected businessmen in the country. When Augustus finally managed to rejoin Janine, she was talking with a man roughly her own age, tall and athletically built. Their body language suggested intimacy, triggering a twinge of jealousy in Augustus. "Janine, you were amazing," he said, interrupting the conversation. "Your voice is just as beautiful as I remember." She blushed slightly. "Thank you." "Augustus, this is Richard, Larissa's father." Richard extended his hand with a smile that never reached his eyes. "So you're the famous Augustus Mendoza. Janine mentioned your reunion." "I hope it's only good things," Augustus replied, gripping the other man's hand a little too firmly. The tension between the two men was palpable. Richard draped an arm around Janine's shoulders in a possessive gesture that she subtly evaded. "Richard is just passing through New York City," she explained, visibly uncomfortable. "He came to visit Larissa." "Actually, I'm thinking of moving back," Richard interjected, glancing meaningfully at Janine. "I miss my family." Before Augustus could respond, Larissa appeared, dragging Mrs. Zelda along. The elderly woman looked agitated. "Janine, the rain ruined the roof at the choir's headquarters. We're looking for a place to store the instruments and sheet music," Mrs. Zelda explained anxiously. "You can take everything to my house," Janine offered immediately. "But honey, your roof has problems too," Mrs. Zelda reminded her. "Last time it rained, you had buckets all over the living room." Janine shot her friend an angry look, clearly embarrassed by the exposure of her financial situation. "I can help," Augustus interjected quickly. "I have a construction team that could fix the choir's roof today and also take a look at your house, Janine." "We don't need your charity," Richard snapped. "It's not charity, it's an investment in the community," Augustus replied, maintaining his composure. "Mendoza Developments has a corporate social responsibility program active in communities across New York City. It would be my pleasure to help." Janine's gaze wavered between the two men as the conflict grew within her. Finally, she sighed deeply. "We'll accept your help for the choir headquarters, Augustus," she decided to Mrs. Zelda's relief. "As for my house, I can handle that on my own." "Janine," Richard began, discontented. "We've already decided, Richard," she cut him off firmly, turning to Augustus. "May I have the address of the headquarters? The sooner we resolve this, the better." While they exchanged details, Larissa watched the scene with mounting interest. The perceptive teenager noticed every nuance in the interaction between her mother and the businessman. When Augustus stepped away to make a few phone calls, she approached her mother. "He isn't just an old friend, is he?" Larissa questioned, making air quotes. Janine hesitated. "It's complicated, sweetheart." "Doesn't seem that complicated to me," the teenager retorted. "I saw the way you look at each other, and now Dad's talking about a reunited family." She rolled her eyes. "The timing couldn't be worse." "Larissa, don't get involved in this," Janine warned. "These are adult matters." The Zatu girl shrugged, but her green eyes shone with determination. "All right, Mom, I just don't want to see you hurt again." Later that day, while a team from Mendoza Developments worked on the choir headquarters roof, Augustus received a call from his doctor. The results of his latest tests had arrived, and they needed to talk urgently. Feeling a tightening in his chest, a sensation that had become frequent over the past few weeks, he scheduled an appointment for the next day. At home, Larissa rummaged through her mother's old memory chest, an occasional pastime when Janine was out. This time, however, her search had a defined purpose. Amid old photographs and yellowed letters, she found what she was looking for, an old album with photos of Paradise Isle. She carefully flipped through the pages, observing an image of her teenage mother, radiant beside a tall, dark-haired young man. It was unmistakably Augustus Mendoza, 20 years younger but with the same confident smile. In one photo, he embraced Janine on the beach, both wearing expressions of pure happiness. Flipping the photo over, she read the inscription, "Janine and Augustus, Paradise Isle, January 2004, forever." The contrast between that promise and what really transpired sent a wave of indignation through Larissa on her mother's behalf. At the bottom of the chest, she discovered a yellowed envelope in her mother's handwriting. Inside was an incomplete, never-sent letter. "Augustus, I know you chose your path and I respect that, but there's something I need to tell you." The rest of the letter had been torn away. Intrigued, Larissa continued searching until she finally found a small diary. Its entries, dated 2004, revealed the intense romance on Paradise Isle, the pain of separation and something more. Something that made Larissa's eyes widen in shock. "I can't tell him about the baby," one entry from March read. "Augustus is starting his life in New York, chasing his dreams. A child now would change everything." Larissa dropped the diary, her mind racing with the implications of those words. Was there another child, a sibling she had never known, or perhaps cardiac hypertrophy with risk of heart failure, explained Dr. Paulo Montero, a renowned cardiologist in New York City. "Your heart is enlarged, Augustus, and isn't functioning as it should." Sitting in the luxurious office on Fifth Avenue, Augustus studied the scattered test results on the desk. The doctor's words echoed in his mind, yet seemed distant, as if referring to someone else. "What are my treatment options?" he finally asked, maintaining the controlled tone he reserved for difficult negotiations. "Medication, lifestyle changes, and depending on how things evolve, we might have to consider surgery," the doctor replied. "But the most important thing now is to reduce stress. Your blood pressure is consistently high, which only worsens your condition. Reduce stress." Augustus almost laughed. How could he explain to the doctor that in recent weeks his life had been turned upside down? The reunion with Janine, his son's surveillance, the growing issues with the company, and now this. "How long do I have?" he asked directly. Dr. Montero frowned. "We're not talking about a death sentence, Augustus. With proper treatment, you can live many quality years, but you must take this seriously." Leaving the office with a bag of medications and a list of recommendations, Augustus decided to walk instead of calling his driver. He needed to think. The New York sky was darkening with heavy clouds, heralding another summer storm. His steps led him unsurprisingly to Ipanema Cafe. It was closed at that hour, but a faint light shone from within. Through the display window, he saw Janine closing the register. He tapped lightly on the glass. She looked up, surprised, hesitated for a moment, then went to open the door. "Augustus, are you all right?" she asked, noticing his pallor. "Just stopping by to see how things are," he replied with a forced smile. "I heard the team finished repairing the choir's roof." "Yes, it looks great. Mrs. Zelda can't stop praising your act of kindness," Janine said, letting him in. "It's raining, isn't it? You're soaked." "It started while I was on my way here," he explained, running a hand through his wet hair. "I think it'll only get worse." As if to confirm his words, a thunderclap echoed on the empty streets. Janine peered out the window, worried. "Larissa is alone at home," she murmured. "Can I give you a ride?" Augustus offered. She hesitated, but another flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a threatening roar. "I just need to finish up here." 10 minutes later, they were racing in his car under torrential rain. Augustus drove cautiously, found through the streets of Soho, which were beginning to flood. "Turn right at the next corner," Janine instructed. "My street is the third on the left." When they arrived, the situation was worse than expected. The narrow street was partially flooded, and some trees had fallen branches. Janine's modest two-story house already showed signs of roof leakage. Larissa was waiting on the covered porch, visibly distressed. "Mom, water is coming in through your bedroom roof." Janine rushed inside, followed by Augustus. Upstairs, the scene was disheartening. Part of the gypsum ceiling had collapsed onto the bed, and rainwater formed a small cascade in the center of the room. "Oh my God," Janine whimpered, dashing to save what she could of her belongings. "Grab the essentials," Augustus ordered, naturally taking charge. "Clothes, documents, medications, you can't stay here tonight." "And where will we go?" Janine asked, stuffing clothes into a suitcase. "To my place," he replied simply. When he saw her protesting, he added, "It's the most logical option, Janine. I have plenty of space, and it's just for tonight." Faced with the emergency, she grudgingly agreed. 30 minutes later, Augustus's car pulled into the underground garage of one of the most luxurious buildings on the Upper East Side. A uniformed doorman greeted them courteously and helped with the luggage. "Good. Evening, Mr. Mendoza. We've prepared the apartment as you instructed." Larissa gaped at everything: the elegant lobby, mirrored elevators, and the spectacular view from the duplex penthouse occupying the building's top 2 floors. "Do you live here alone?" the teenager asked, marveling at the expansive living room with its soaring ceiling and floor-to-ceiling windows. "Since the divorce," Augustus confirmed. "Make yourselves at home. Carmen, the housekeeper, has prepared the guest rooms and even set dinner." The contrast between Janine's modest house and the luxury of this apartment could not have been starker. While Larissa explored the new surroundings in awe, Janine appeared uncomfortable, as if afraid to break something precious. "You didn't have to do this, Augustus," she whispered. "We could have gone to a hotel and missed the chance to have you under the same roof, even if just for one night," he teased, then more seriously added, "Don't worry, Janine. Tomorrow I'll send a team to assess the damage to your house." "I can't afford that," she replied, arms crossed. "Consider it part of our corporate social responsibility program," he insisted. "Besides, you'd be doing me a favor. This place is far too big for just one person." After a silent dinner in the kitchen's informal dining area, none of them felt comfortable using the formal dining room, Augustus showed them to the prepared bedrooms. Larissa, exhausted by the hectic day, retired immediately, but not before casting a meaningful look at her mother. Later, alone in the corridor, Janine thanked Augustus. "Thank you for taking us in. I know we couldn't have predicted the storm, but still—" "Janine," Augustus interrupted softly, "stop thanking me. I'd do anything for you, I always would." Something in his sincere words disarmed her. For a moment, time seemed to reverse, and they were once again the young lovers on Paradise Isle. "Why did you never come back?" she whispered. "After you left for New York, and not even one visit." His answer caught him off guard. I was afraid, he admitted after a long silence. Afraid that if I saw you again, I wouldn't be able to stay on the path I'd chosen. You were my greatest weakness, Janine, and I couldn't afford to be weak. Tears shone in her eyes. And I waited, you know, month after month believing you'd return, until I realized I had to move on. I'm sorry, he murmured, stepping toward her. More than you can imagine. At that moment, the door to Larissa's room burst open. The teenager appeared pale, clutching her cell phone. Mom, I just saw in the neighborhood chat, a lightning strike hit the big tree in front of our house. It fell on the roof. Janine clutched her face. Oh my God! Photos are already being shared, Larissa continued, showing her phone. It looks really bad. Images displayed the enormous century-old jackfruit tree, once the pride of the street, now lying atop Janine's roof. The structure appeared to have partially given way under its weight. I'll call the fire department, Augustus said, taking out his own phone. In the ensuing hours, a series of calls confirmed the worst. The house had suffered severe structural damage. It wouldn't be safe to return anytime soon. Seated in the living room with the storm still battering the city outside, Augustus made the offer he'd been rehearsing in his mind. Stay here while your house is rebuilt, he proposed. I have more than enough space and I'm rarely home during the day. Augustus, we can't accept that, Janine protested. You've already taken in too much tonight. Please, Mum, Larissa interjected, surprising them both. It's better than a hotel and we wouldn't have to worry about the costs right now. Janine eyed her daughter suspiciously. The usually protective teen now seemed oddly in favor of staying at Augustus's place. It's temporary, Augustus insisted, just until your house is livable again. Exhausted and with few viable alternatives, Janine finally agreed. Only a few weeks, she stipulated firmly. And we'll chip in for the expenses. Augustus smiled, satisfied. As you wish. Now I think we all need to rest. It's been a long day. That night, lying in his bed, Augustus couldn't sleep. The proximity of Janine, sleeping just a few meters away, stirred him more than his newly diagnosed heart condition ever could. Having her under his roof, even in these circumstances, felt like a sign from fate. In the guest room, Janine, too, remained awake, replaying the interrupted conversation with Augustus. There was so much left unsaid between them, so many secrets buried by time. She feared that forced proximity might bring those truths to light before she was ready. In the third room, Larissa typed furiously on her laptop. Unlike her mother, the teenager saw the situation as an opportunity. On her screen, with several tabs open, were details about Augustus Mendoza, articles about his business, photos from social events, and most importantly, an old piece about his family. In a 2005 photo, Augustus appeared with an elegant woman holding a baby. The caption read, "Businessman Augustus Mendoza, with his wife Christina and their newborn Henry." Larissa did a quick mental calculation. If Henry was born in 2005 and she in 2008, a chill ran down her spine as she confirmed her suspicion. She needed to know more, much more. The next morning, as Janine and Augustus sat down for coffee, in an awkward silence in the kitchen, the private elevator announced someone's arrival. The doors opened, revealing Henry Mendoza, who froze upon seeing the domestic scene before him. "Dad?" he exclaimed, confused. "What's going on?" "Here." Augustus stood up, tense. "Henry, these are Janine and her daughter Larissa. Their house was damaged in yesterday's storm, so I invited them to stay here temporarily." Henry's eyes, so similar to his father's, coldly appraised the two women. "What a convenient coincidence," he commented, with barely concealed sarcasm. "Can we talk in the office?" Augustus suggested, irritated by his son's rudeness. As the men withdrew, Larissa glared at Henry with an unsettling intensity. There was something about the young executive's face that intrigued her deeply. Perhaps his dark eyes or the shape of his nose. "It's unacceptable, Dad," Henry protested in the office. "You barely know these women, and you've already brought them to live here. Imagine what the press would say if they found out." Augustus glared at his son coolly. First, I've known Janine longer than you can imagine. Second, I don't care about the press. And third, this is my house. And my life. Your life that directly affects the company, Henry retorted. The Brasilia project investors are concerned about your erratic behavior these past weeks. Last-minute cancellations, a lack of focus in meetings. Tell them not to worry, Augustus cut in. I've never left a project half-finished, and I won't start now. Henry studied his father intently. There's something you're not telling me. Are you sick? The question took Augustus by surprise. His son was far more perceptive than he'd realized. I'm fine, he lied, just reassessing some priorities. Priorities like that barista and your daughter, Henry said sarcastically. Don't talk about them that way, Augustus warned in a dangerously low voice. Janine was... She was very important to me back then. A look of understanding briefly crossed Henry's face. I see, an old affair. Did she resurface demanding money? Is that what's happening? Augustus exhaled slowly, controlling his anger. It'd be better if you left now before I say something I'll regret. And next time, call before you show up. In another part of the apartment, Janine was finishing washing the cafe's cups when Larissa entered the kitchen, watching her intently. Why did you never tell me about Augustus? Larissa asked abruptly. Janine almost dropped a cup. What do you mean? I found your old diary, Mom, Larissa admitted bluntly. I know you had a serious relationship with him before he left for New York. I know you were pregnant when he abandoned you. Color drained from Janine's face. You had no right to read my diary, Larissa. And you had no right to... Hide the truth from me all your life, the teenager shot back, her green eyes blazing with anger and hurt. Richard isn't my biological father, is he? Janine trembled as she dried her hands on her apron and sat at the kitchen table. After a long silence, she answered almost in a whisper, No. It's Augustus, Larissa stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Augustus Mendoza is my biological father, and you never told him. You never told anyone. Tears streamed down Janine's face. Richard always knew. I met him when you were just a baby. He loved you as if you were his own. Legally, he's your father. But biologically, it's Augustus, Larissa insisted. The man who is now sheltering us without knowing. He's carrying his own daughter. I was going to tell him when I found out I was pregnant, Janine explained between sobs. But then I saw an article about him in a magazine. He was engaged to the daughter of an influential businessman. It talked about his big projects and how he was about to take a leap in his career. A baby would have ruined everything. So you chose him, Larissa accused. You deprived him of the right to know his own daughter. I was young and terrified, Janine defended. My parents had just died and I was alone on Paradise Isle. And now, what's your excuse? Larissa questioned harshly. He's here, Mom, right in front of us, offering help without knowing what we really are to him. Janine wiped her tears, struggling to regain her composure. It's complicated, dear. The longer time goes by, the harder it gets to tell the truth. He has the right to know, Larissa insisted, and I have the right to know my real father. We need time, Janine pleaded. We can't just drop this on him all of a sudden. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Augustus entered the kitchen, immediately noticing the charged atmosphere and Janine's red-rimmed eyes. Is everything okay? He asked, concerned. Everything's fine, Janine replied quickly. We were just talking about the house. About that, he said. I had a team check the damages. Unfortunately, they're worse than we initially thought. The tree compromised the structure. We'll practically need to rebuild the roof and part of the walls. How long would that take? Janine asked, her stomach sinking. At least 3 months, Augustus replied. But don't worry, you can stay here as long as needed. Larissa exchanged a meaningful look with her mother. 3 months of living together. It would be impossible to keep such a secret for that long. The following weeks established an odd domestic routine in Augustus's apartment. Janine continued working at the cafe while Larissa attended school. At night, they often dined together, a cautious closeness gradually easing the initial tension. To everyone's surprise, not least his own, Augustus discovered that he enjoyed the company. the sound of female voices echoing in once empty halls, the small changes they brought, fresh flowers on the dining table, the aroma of home-cooked meals replacing delivery orders, Larissa's books scattered about the living room. One Thursday night, after a dinner in which Janine had prepared the moqueca he'd once raved about during the Paradise Isle days, Augustus found her on the balcony, watching the city lights. "Thank you for dinner," he said, joining her. "It's been years since I had something so delicious." She smiled, genuinely this time. "Cooking has always been my therapy, and you always loved moqueca." "You remember," he commented, both surprised and moved. "I remember many things, Augustus," she replied softly. Gathering his courage, he said, "Janine, there's something I need to tell you. Last week I discovered I have a heart condition. Nothing fatal, but serious enough to make me rethink many things." The immediate concern on her face moved him. "Is that why you seemed so down on that stormy night? Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't want your pity," he admitted. "I wanted you back in my life for me, not out of obligation." "Nonsense," she chided gently. "What treatment did the doctors recommend?" As he explained about the medications and lifestyle changes, Janine listened intently. At the end, she took his hand in a spontaneous gesture. "It'll be all right," she assured him, "but you need to take better care of yourself." Her touch sent an electric current through Augustus's arm. Slowly, as if afraid of startling her, he brought his hand to her face and caressed her cheek with his thumb. "I wasted so much time, Janine," he murmured. "I spent years chasing things that never brought me true happiness." Before she could reply, Augustus's cell phone began to ring insistently. It was Henry. Reluctantly, he answered and moved to a quieter part of the apartment. The conversation was tense and brief. When he returned, his face was ashen. "What happened?" Janine asked, alarmed. "Henry convened an emergency board meeting for tomorrow," Augustus explained tensely. "He's trying to force me out as company president, claiming I'm unfit because of my health issues." "He can't do that." "Technically he can if he has the board's support," Augustus said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Apparently he's been speaking individually with each member these past few weeks, planting doubts about my capability." "Your own son doing this?" Janine murmured, horrified. A bitter laugh escaped Augustus. "It's ironic. I built an empire as my legacy, and now it's being used against me." That night, Augustus barely slept as he prepared for the corporate battle that awaited him. The next day, he donned his best suit, armed himself with financial reports and medical documents, and headed into the confrontation with a determination he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Larissa made a decision. Without consulting her mother, she took a taxi to the headquarters of Mendoza Developments, a towering skyscraper in the financial heart of New York City. At the reception, she announced confidently, "I need to speak with Henry Mendoza. Tell him that Larissa Silva is here and it's urgent." Surprisingly, she was escorted to the executive floor, where she found Henry reviewing documents before a board meeting. "I have only 5 minutes," he said coldly. "What does the daughter, my father's friend, want with me?" Larissa stared at him unflinchingly. "I came to show you something that might interest you." She extended a folder. "These are the results of a DNA test I did 2 weeks ago. I bought a kit online." Henry took the folder with skepticism. "And why should I care?" "Because, according to these results, there's a 99.9% chance that Augustus Mendoza is my biological father," she replied calmly. "Which makes you my half-brother." The shock on Henry's face was priceless. He rifled through the papers, mouth agape, searching for any sign of fraud. "That's impossible," he mumbled. "My mother was pregnant when your father left for New York," Larissa explained. "She never told him, so as not to disrupt his career and his imminent marriage." Henry slumped into a chair, processing the revelation. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you're about to take away from your own family what they built," Larissa said. "I've seen how you treat our father, like he's just another piece in your corporate game." "You don't know anything about our relationship," Henry defended. "I know enough," she shot back. "I know he built everything for you while we grew up in a modest home in Soho. My mother worked 2 jobs to pay for my school, while you had everything handed to you." A flash of guilt sparked in Henry's eyes before being quickly replaced by suspicion. "What do you want? Money? Recognition?" "I want you to cancel that ridiculous meeting," Larissa demanded. "I want you to give our father a chance to fix things his way, and I want you to think carefully before deciding whether you'll use this DNA test to bring us closer or tear us apart further." Leaving the folder on Henry's desk, Larissa walked out without waiting for a response, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she'd done the right thing, but she knew she couldn't keep that secret any longer. Hours later, Augustus returned to the apartment, exhausted but triumphant. "The meeting was cancelled at the last minute," Janine announced, anxiously. Henry claimed he needed to reconsider some points of the proposal. Janine embraced him impulsively, relief washing over her. The warmth of her body against his awakened a torrent of long-repressed emotions. When they pulled apart, their eyes met, and without words, both knew that the inevitable could no longer be postponed. "Janine, we need to talk," she interrupted firmly. "There's something you need to know, something I should have told you long ago." Before she could continue, the sound of the door signaled Larissa's arrival. The teenager looked agitated. "Are you all right, dear?" Janine asked, concerned. Larissa glanced between Augustus and her mother, hesitant. "I think I did something you both need to know." In the ensuing minutes, she confessed her visit to Henry and the revelation she'd made. Janine paled, steadying herself against the table to avoid falling. Augustus stood frozen, absorbing every word as if trying to decipher a foreign language. "And I brought a copy of the results for you," Larissa concluded, handing an envelope to Augustus with trembling hands. The ensuing silence felt eternal. Augustus slowly opened the envelope, examining the papers as if they were a valuable contract. His eyes moved from the document to Larissa's face, searching and finding features of his own he'd never noticed before. "Why?" Janine finally asked, her voice choked. "Why did you never tell me?" Janine wiped away the tears streaming down her face. "Because you had a bright future ahead and I was just the island girl. When I found out I was pregnant, you were already in New York, engaged, starting your company. How could I show up with a baby and ruin everything?" "It wasn't your decision to make," he said, his restrained anger causing Larissa to step back. "It was our daughter, ours." "I know," Janine whispered, "and with each passing year it became harder to tell the truth. When you reappeared at the cafe, it was as if the past came back to haunt me." Augustus walked to the window, turning his back on them as he tried to organize the whirlwind of emotions. He had lost so many moments, the first smile, the first words, the first steps. 16 years he would never get back. "We need time," he finally said without turning around. "All of us." That night, the apartment was shrouded in tense silence. Augustus locked himself in his office while Janine and Larissa stayed. In their rooms, each processing in their own way the seismic shock they had experienced. The next morning brought another surprise. Henry appeared early, looking as if he'd slept as little as the rest. Without many words, he asked to speak with his father alone. In the office, father and son faced each other with a new perspective. "Why did you never tell me about Janine?" Henry asked bluntly. Augustus sighed deeply. "It was a chapter of my life I believed was closed, or at least that's what I thought." "And Larissa, do you truly believe she's your daughter?" "Look at her, Henry," Augustus replied, with a sad smile. "She has my eyes, my nose, even my stubbornness, it seems." A thoughtful silence settled until Henry spoke again. "You know, when Mom left me at 17 to follow that painter to Paris, you said something I've never forgotten. You said, 'That family is more than blood, it's a choice.'" Augustus nodded, remembering. "And I still believe that." "So," Henry continued, "I think it's time to make some choices. I permanently cancelled that proposal to the board. And if you want to officially acknowledge Larissa as your daughter, you have my support." The sincerity in his son's words took Augustus by surprise. For the first time in years, he felt the wall between them begin to crumble. "Thank you," he said simply. After Henry left, Augustus found Janine and Larissa in the kitchen, silently sharing coffee. He sat down, pouring himself a cup. "I need you both to understand something," he began calmly. "I'm hurt and confused. I lost 16 years of my daughter's life that I can never get back. But I also lost 20 years away from you. Janine, because of choices I made, I have no right to judge your decisions." Silent tears streamed down Janine's face. Larissa held her mother's hand tightly. "What's done is done," he continued. "Now we need to decide what comes next." He turned to Larissa. "If you want, I'd like to legally acknowledge you as my daughter, but I'll understand if you prefer to keep Richard as your father. After all, he was there for you all these years." Larissa took a deep breath. "I don't want to replace anyone. Richard will always be important to me. But I'd really like to get to know you better." A lump formed in Augustus's throat. "I would like that too, very much." Janine watched the interaction between father and daughter, a mix of relief and guilt in her heart. When Larissa left to prepare for school, Janine finally found a moment alone with Augustus. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, breaking the silence. "I know," he replied as he stepped closer. "Just as I never meant to abandon you. We were young and made mistakes. The difference is you owned yours while I ran from mine." Hesitantly, she reached out to touch his face. "And now, what do we do?" Augustus took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "We start over. We build something new, this time together if you'll let me." In the following month, many changes unfolded. Janine's house was rebuilt, sturdier and more comfortable than before, yet she and Larissa chose to remain at Augustus's apartment. Henry spent more time with his newly discovered sister, developing a bond that surprised everyone with how easily it formed. Following his doctor's advice, Augustus reduced his workload, delegating more responsibilities to Henry and other directors. His heart, both physical and emotional, began to mend. On a Saturday afternoon, while watching Janine paint on the balcony, a hobby she had resumed with his encouragement, Augustus reflected on how life can be so surprising. 20 years. Dago, he had chosen business success over love. Now fate had given him a second chance. The inauguration of the Ipanema Gallery Cafe, located on the ground floor of one of the Mendoza Developments buildings, was a modest yet significant event. Janine, now a co-owner, had transformed the space into a hybrid cafe and art gallery, where her own works were displayed alongside those of emerging local artists. The welcoming atmosphere, with its dark wood furniture and earth-toned walls, reflected her personality, authentic and unpretentious. On the walls, among abstract paintings and Brazilian landscapes, a series of canvases depicting the coast of Paradise Isle stood out, reminding everyone where it all began. As friends, family, and a few special clients mingled, Augustus watched Janine with pride. She chatted animatedly with Mrs. Zelda, who would supply the sweets for the new venture. Larissa helped serve the guests, proudly wearing a custom uniform she had designed herself. In a quieter corner, Henry conversed with a group of young artists, showing a genuine interest that Augustus had never imagined from the numbers-driven executive he once knew. "What are you thinking about?" Janine asked, approaching him with 2 champagne flutes. "About how life can be so surprising," he replied, accepting the drink. "6 months ago, I was a lonely businessman obsessed with work. Now I have a family." She smiled, the smile that had always enchanted him. "Do you believe in fate, Augustus?" "I believe that some people are destined to meet," he answered, lightly clinking his glass with hers, "no matter how long or how many detours the road takes." At that moment, Larissa joined them, followed by Henry. The 4 of them formed an unlikely tableau, a family forged by winding paths, bound by ties that transcended time and past mistakes. "Here's to the Ipanema Gallery Cafe," Henry proposed, raising his glass. "And to family," Larissa added, her smile lighting up her eyes, the same eyes as Augustus's. "To family," they all agreed, sealing a promise of a shared future with that simple toast. Later, when the pace had slowed and most guests had departed, Augustus found Janine sitting on the back porch watching the New York sunset. "Do you remember that last night on Paradise Isle?" she asked softly, as he sat beside her. "You told me you'd come back." "And I did," he replied, taking her hand. "I just took a little longer than promised." Janine laughed gently. 20 years isn't a little longer, Augustus. What are 20 years to someone who still has the rest of their life ahead, he countered, leaning in to kiss her. The kiss carried the flavor of fulfilled promises and the beginning of new journeys. When they pulled apart, Augustus retrieved a small box from his pocket. "It's not a marriage proposal," he clarified at the look of surprise on her face. "Not yet. It's just a promise." Inside the box was a delicate silver ring set with a tiny blue-green stone. Janine recognized it immediately. It was identical to the one he had given her during that last summer on Paradise Isle, which she had lost years later during a move. "How did you?" she began. "I had a replica made," he explained, "to symbolize that sometimes we can regain what we thought was lost forever." With tears in her eyes, Janine allowed him to slide the ring onto her finger. It was a new beginning, a new chapter in a story that, though long interrupted, had never truly ended. On the New York horizon, the sun disappeared behind towering skyscrapers, yielding to the first stars of the night. A gentle breeze carried the aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the gallery's interior, where Larissa and Henry were animatedly discussing the arrangement of paintings for the next day. "You know what I learned in these 20 years? Augustus mused, embracing Janine as they watched the slowly illuminating city. "What?" "That true success isn't measured by buildings constructed or money accumulated," he replied. "It's measured by the bonds we form, the lives we touch, and the love we share." Janine rested her head on his shoulder, finally feeling at peace. The winding paths they had traversed, with all their twists and turns, had brought them exactly where they were meant to be, together, at last. And as the city lights twinkled like stars around them, they both knew that no matter how long it had taken, the cycle was complete, and a new one was only just beginning.